Has anyone else thought of this possibility? Could it be possible that the show could be giving us hints to the Pups' backgrounds? I mean, I know it seems a little hard to believe, or even may seem far out there, but I honestly believe they might maybe be doing this. I mean, it's hard for me to really explain that in a way without going into a lot of detail. Yeah, so, hi everyone, my name is AnimalsPawPony, and I am going to be discussing a certain, set of events that could possibly lead to, an explanation for the Pups' backgrounds. Now, what I mean by this is that I've actually looked at certain moments in different episodes of PAW Patrol and have noticed some specific things in regards to legends or specific characters or other moments. And it makes me wonder, has the show been giving us clues as to possibly Tracker, Sky, Rubble, and Rocky's backstories? I mean, again, it seems like they wouldn't really confirm that. Plus, there's another episode that's actually going to possibly, it's unknown at this point, I'm only going off of what other people are saying, might include Jesus' parents. But at the same time, it just, it's hard for me to say no, but at the same time, I can totally see my hypothesis also being something of, just a bunch of coincidences. So I'm not entirely sure. In fact, I'm even thinking of creating fan fiction off of my theory, because I think it would be interesting to just play around with, honestly. And here's what I mean. I'm going to be actually making a daily motion video about this at some point soon, because this is a whole chain of events and concepts that I've thought of for PAW Patrol that, I mean, I'd have to look back at my notes, but still, I'm noticing certain things in the show that seem really interesting in regards to character backstories that, heck, I even may have, in a way, a little bit of a little bit of a timeline in regards to how some of these events may have happened. The positive news is I am almost done with my PAW Patrol research in regards to watching episodes and counting infringements, and then the only thing I have left is just calculations. So, yeah, once I get the episodes done, I'm definitely going to be doing way more YouTube videos. Thank goodness for that. And, yeah, this is something I've been thinking about for quite a long time. Like, okay, let me just give you guys a short version of this. Based on certain moments in the show, first off, I'm going to start with Tracker, and here's why. For Tracker, one of his relatives, as mentioned in the Sea Patrol Pirate Pup special, is that one of his relatives either knew or was a member, someone correct me on that, of the pirate Jack Scallywag's pirate crew. And of course we had the whole concept of him burying his treasure, the animals having green glowing eyes and wanting to guard the treasure and everything. And of course him hiding it and so on and so forth. Now, as far as the curse goes, there's nothing really I can think of that would indicate that, because it's something that, to my knowledge, has only happened once in the show. And whoa, hold on. I'll be right back. But yeah, as I was saying, Captain Jack Scallywag, with the curse, we've never really seen anything like that before in the series, or at least the glowing green eyes and everything. Then again, I had to double check. And Angel Eye Storm, Party Plan Preston, anyone, if any of you have any ideas, throw them out there. Throw them out there, because I would rather have information that I would not want to use than to not have information that might help me with my theory. But the reason I point this out is because this is interesting, because when you look on the island, especially at the stone pillars, it looks rather similar to the monkey pillars back in the jungle where Tracker lived. So, I don't know, did Jack Scallywag find one of Tracker's ancestors and they just stole the treasure because at the time there was no monkey queen or any kind of monkey civilization, and it was just some, lost temple that some old civilization made up or something? Yeah, I don't really have much to go on that, but at the same time, it's interesting because, again, monkey pillars, the eyes glow green, and just, I don't know why, but it seems like it would be something that would almost be, linked to, I guess you could say, the jungle in some way. I don't know, I'm just getting that kind of vibe from there. And then, of course, the curse happened and was resolved with the flute that he buried in the treasure chest. So there's that. Another concept is the Pups. And I say the Pups because we don't really have an idea of how long they've been there. Apart from just legends, especially with Captain Turbo when he was a kid in the Pup episode, he actually ended up seeing them. But I'm going to get back to that in a moment. I just thought something that would be rather interesting. In the season 1 finale, Pups and the Pirate Treasure, we have this concept of a legendary pirate, Blackfur, who just so happens, as we learn later on, looks much like Rubble except for the Blackfur beard. Could they be related? I know it's a far stretch, and some could argue that it could just be another bulldog who just happens to be the same breed as Rubble with a black fur beard, and they're not related at all. But I don't know. It seems I don't know. It's weird because what are the odds that as an orphan, Rubble would join the PAW Patrol? He's the construction pup, which means he digs up stuff. The treasure with clues is the very first sighting is underground. And then after that, you have the stone in the park, the woods that looks like a parrot, which makes sense. And then the last one happens to be on the ship, which is old and not in very good condition, and has been out in the distance in some weird green spooky fog when the pups find it and everything, and heck, Ryan even admits it's not safe to go look for treasure on there at the moment. It's interesting because I just thought of something. What if, and I'm taking this actually from the Ghost Pirate episode, Captain Turret made up a story about how there used to be, a legend has it that there was a pirate crew that sailed, Adventure Bay with the Ghost crew. I know this is I know this is a far-fetched, but could that have been foreshadowing Black Fur? I mean, keep in mind, the ship was old, it was spooky, there was no acknowledgement of its existence. This was before the season finale, and season 1 finale, actually, and there are spooky things happening, and then, of course, we see that, ghostly pirate ship across the moon. Could this mean somehow Black Fur's crew, or even, then again, I doubt this, either Black Fur or Jack Scallywag could have been messing around with them? I mean, at the same time, you could make the argument it would have been Black Fur, because I believe they made the comment of Black Fur, Adventure Bay's most mysterious pirate. I mean, obviously, if, based on when Captain Turbot told Ryder that he thought, oh, I found Captain Blackfur's treasure, clearly he is well known throughout the town. And I imagine he would have lived years and years ago. So, could he have been messing around with them to foreshadow the fact that his old ship still exists and that he actually wanted someone to find it? I mean, again, all this is just a theory, but still, you have to wonder, was that the intention? I mean, if it was, job well done. I mean, yeah, they did find it eventually. So there was that. Also, there is one thing that confuses me. How is it that little Hootie and his mom were able to be in the forest area with the trees, where one of the clues was, with the treasure bottle clue in the knothole of one of the trees, and yet we see in Pupsy of a Hoot that there's only one tree in the area. There was no other trees around in that area when little Hootie and his mother's tree, their home, blew down in the wind. The only guess I can come up with is that more trees were planted by someone, but at the same time, that doesn't make sense, because given the amount of time that's gone on, one, depending on the kind of tree, some trees, like pine trees, they take years to grow. They don't take a short amount of time to grow. It depends on the plant. Like, for example, I know I planted a pine tree when I was in Boy Scouts once, and I've checked on it, and that thing isn't even at full height, or half of the height of a full tree. So, yeah, it takes years for those kind of trees to grow. But then again, it wasn't a pine tree, but I'm just throwing that as an example. Plus, you have to keep in mind that if Black Fur lived years ago, the trees would have to at least exist for him to plant the bottle in, or the trees somehow got torn down or died or were destroyed due to lightning or whatever, and then someone had to move the bottle to a very similar location. But I don't know what to think of that, because it's confusing because of the lack of trees in that episode. But at the same time, it's like, that doesn't make sense, because how long Black Fur would have had to be existing at the time when he was playing all the clues. So there's all that. So I don't know, but could that be possible? And then on top of that, that also would explain the Merpups, because if the Merpups were non-existent, I mean, what if they were afraid of, like, people like Black Fur finding out about them and then wanting to capture them to make money, or expose them somehow? And there was really no one around that the Merpups could really trust with their secret. So that's another thing. Because, I mean, that would make total sense unless they just wanted to stay hidden. And, I mean, the same thing goes with Jack Scallywag. What if their actual home was near the island, and then they had to move when he got a hold of the island and was, hiding his treasure from the jungle? That would actually make sense. So, going to Adventure Bay would have seemed more safe. Stay tuned. There is a part 2. Back. This is part 2 of my theory. And this is a short version, actually, to be honest, both of them. But, again, going back to the Pups, what if that was the case? And another thing that I find, and the reason I'm pinpointing all this is, with Tracker, I figure Jack Scallywag, not only because of one of his ancestors, like he said, but the fact that there's jungle treasure in the hidden cave. I mean, come on, there's the only other places we've seen it has been the jungle with the monkey temple, so that is the only place I can think of him even getting something like that, unless it was like duplicate treasure or structures like that on the island. But again, nothing would really suggest that. So that's another thing. So that's it for Tracker. But then at the same time, you know, like I mentioned with Black Fur, obviously we have the Rebel concept. And that's actually interesting in general, just because of like what I said with the breed. Except there's another thing that I find even more interesting with the Pups. And here's what I mean by that. Many people have actually pointed out that Sky looks very similar to the Pups. Honestly, if she was a Pup at some point and then turned into a puppy just because, you know, maybe the Pups were thinking, you know, oh, we can't trust anyone on the land, we don't know what land is like, blah, 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 blah. And then they sent Sky as one of their own, but turned totally into a pup to, like, investigate and live on the land, almost like a reverse of, almost similar to, like, a Little Mermaid kind of thing from Disney, but, you know, doing it for curiosity's sake. I mean, that actually might work. That actually would make sense, but at the same time, like, I don't know, if they took her ability to remember Pups and they just wanted her to live a happy life, that could have been another possibility. But the reason I mentioned the pirate thing with Black Fur and the Pups is we see in the first episode, when the Pup, the baby Pup, is hiding behind a chair, there is a portrait of Black Fur behind the chair. Could this mean that that ship was Black Fur's old ship? I mean, the design of the floor, the mass, the colors, the photo, the fact that it was an old ship, at some point it sank. And it ended up there. That's not exactly far-fetched. That's actually not that hard to see that happening. Plus, Ryan mentioned, it's falling apart. So if water got in and then just sank the whole ship out of nowhere, which I don't know why Adventure Bay would have made a big deal about that, because it's a part of their history. It's a part of one of their famous, well-known historical figures. So why not try and figure out what happened to it? That was never made into an episode. Excuse me, but that's just one point. But again, what if the ship was Captain Blackfur's? The only thing I can come up with is just the overall design of the ship when you look at it, both in the Merpup episode and Pups Save the Pups and the Pirate Treasure, as well as the picture of Blackfur. I mean, in a way, it wouldn't be that surprising if it was, which, if that is, that's pretty cool, because that is a huge continuity throwback to season 1. So that's the only thing that I can think of. But on top of that, there's another concept that I also thought of, which is Rocky's backstory. For the episode Pups Save the Golden Bones, we ended up seeing this giant chamber with gold bones and even pillars with, you know, rock statue versions of Rocky, as well as a giant gold version of Rocky on a large pillar, pedestal or whatever, with a crown on his head. Could this have mean that Rocky's ancestors may have been lords of Adventure Bay before it became a modern town? Does this mean that the Adventure Bay actually had a king ruling? Hopefully, I'd imagine, hopefully with a owner of some kind, and of course through royal heritage. You know, Rocky's ancestor was also a king. find it hard to believe that a pup would be able to rule over the town or kingdom or whatever. But that's just a thought. But I mean, at the same time, it's interesting because, and this is where it ties in a little bit more, which is, sorry, hold on, back. But yeah, just, that was another idea I thought of was, what if Rocky's ancestor at some point ruled over the town as a king? That's interesting because, in a way, and this is another thing I want to point out, I don't know if you guys noticed this, but some people might say, well, he has gold, what about black fur? You know, could there be a connection there? And I'm going to say no for two reasons. Is one, the shape of the gold is different. With black fur, it was traditional pirate gold, but there's even a point when Marshall actually gets a bone out of the treasure chest, and it looks like a regular dog bone, except it's smaller and it's gold. But and because of that, it's different compared to the Rocky King gold, which is more flat. But it's not even, and it was also hid underground, under City Hall, in the Pup Save the Golden Bones. But that's not the only reason why. It's also the color. Because Blackfur's treasure, although it is gold, there are moments where there's like brown in it. It's gold that's aged. Because gold that's more fresh, more decent, has that yellow, glowing shininess to it. So obviously, Blackfur would have had to be in Adventure Bay before the Rocky King. I'm guessing, just going off of history. Whereas the Rocky Gold was much more vibrant in that shine and color and looked like actual gold. Like, you know, voila, you know, shiny kind of gold. So that kind of confirms a little bit, possibly the timeline, which is even more interesting because it leads to my next point, which is, what if, during the rule of Rocky King, he somehow found out about the legend of Blackfur, but wasn't aware that he either was a friendly pirate, or he had gone off on some other adventure, or that he had decided to just reside somewhere in the bay, or otherwise in the Adventure Bay, and just hang out as a form of retirement. Either way, it's interesting because at this point his ship, again going back to season 1, it didn't sink, it wasn't missing, it was still in existence. But the thing is, we had no clue of how long Blackfur actually stayed in Adventure Bay, or if he passed away, or if he had to move somewhere else, or what have you. But it's interesting because I'd imagine that Rocky King would have been concerned of, I have this pirate that's well known, he has gold, pirates have been known to steal gold, and even if he's a nice pirate, it's like, you know, can I trust him? Should we meet? You know, should we form some kind of contract or negotiations for keeping peace? And again, it kind of goes back to both of them too, because here's the thing: on the one hand, it wouldn't be that surprising for them to have like a peace offering, you know, have something where, you know, they make an agreement to not bother each other. They're friends, but they're not going to bother each other. They're not going to cause conflict. But at the same time, just the whole constant common concepts of pirates in general, from stories and, you know, books and so on and so forth, you know, they're always considered as thieves. So I don't find it too far-fetched that he would think Blackfur could also be a bad pirate. Then again, he may also have heard of Jack Scallywag, and certainly with his reputation, it would seem he would be a thief. So all of this leads into my next point, which is, could there be a strong connection between Rocky King and the Merpups? Because, and here's the reason why. The Merpup legend said that there needs to be a special full moon that's of yellowish color, that's big, that comes out every however long, And that's the only time when you see the merpups, and that's when you hear them sing, and you might actually see one. For example, what we saw with Captain Herbert when he was a kid. And now, and the only time that, if you do get turned into a merpup by being touched on the nose, when you're in the water, and that's especially important in the water, you see a merpup out all the way up until the sun rises and the moon goes down, and that actually makes sense because there's a bit of a connection with the legend, the transformation, and the moon. And what other legend have we learned of a similar circumstance? We're puppies. The idea that you need to be in water that's reflecting the full moon, but not just a full moon, a big, white, slightly yellowish moon, and it turned you into a werepuppy. Now, granted, some may say that was just a story, but the way that Uncle Otis said it, back in the day, people were afraid to go outside because of the werepuppies, and considering the real history of werewolves and legends in our own world, could that legend actually hold some water? Could it actually be true to some degree? I mean, think about it. If Rocky King is concerned about a pirate possibly coming and stealing his treasure, he would need to have a way to protect himself, as well as his treasure and anybody else who were friends with him. What if he ended up finding the merpups during an event where there was the merpup mermoon, and they came out, but because they didn't want to be seen as, people either, getting excited and wanting to see them, capturing them for money or scientific purposes or even just for display, and they just want to live their own lives, especially considering, again, you even had the concept of, Merpup Atlantis. So obviously, if that was their home, and this is actually going back to either Blackfur or Jack Scallywag. I imagine Jack Scallywag, though, because his seems to be, as far as the universe goes, the most far back as far as I'm concerned. But then again, it could be both or either one of them. One of the merpups had lived in Atlantis for so long that by the time they heard of pirates, they were concerned. They didn't want to get to know them because they felt like, oh, well, if you do negotiations or conversations with pirates and try and get along with them, they could manipulate you or take advantage of you or trick you or whatever, and it's like, we can't trust them for that reason just because of the basic legends and such, and they want to be safe. And because of that, they never interacted with Blackfur, for example, or Jack Scallywag. In fact, when Jack Scallywag was the reason they even left that area, or were concerned about Merpulius, and they wanted to be more close inland to where they would have felt more safe, rather than just open water. And then when Blackfur comes, that gets them even more concerned, because even if he was a friendly pirate, they wouldn't know whether to trust him or not, and so they just continue to stay in their kingdom as in secrecy. But so there's that concept also with the merpups. But what if in the future, at some point, going back to King Rocky, what if he had seen the merpups, and because he was a land ruler, a keyword land ruler, when the merpups saw them, they got concerned, like, oh, are you going to trap us or what have you? But then again, he already had his gold. There would be no reason to really capture them. So instead, what he ends up doing is he would make an agreement of, I'm not going to reveal you because you want to be secret, but you're nice and I trust you and I have no reason to capture you. But I'm not going to reveal your secret. But at the same time, I'm in this dilemma where I need to have my gold be safe. What if, because of that reason, they transferred some of their mer magic to him, then eventually transpired or became, if you will, what was now known as the legend of the werepuppies. In other words, they gave him magic, but it was in the form of a similar legend, and it made him transform into a werepuppy. All of a sudden, it makes sense. Hold on, there will be a part 3. anyways, I was saying, what if they had made an agreement, the Pups and Rocky King, what if they had made an agreement that I'm aware you Pups exist, but I'm not going to give away your location, not only because we're starting to become friends, but I don't want you to be in danger, and I also have no reason to cause problems with you. And as a result of that, the Pups trusted him and decided to help him out with protecting his gold. And they decided to use their Pup magic on him, which eventually transformed or became the Puppy legend. The idea that you need to be in water during a specific time when the full moon is big and bright and up and reflecting its light in the water, that turns you into a Puppy. And the only cure is sunflowers. It has nothing to do with the actual sun. It's a plant that looks like the sun. And in a way that would make sense, because it would be weird, the idea of having to wait till daytime just to not become a werewolf anymore, or puppy. And instead, it's like, what if we give you the option to be a puppy, and then you could just transform back whenever you wanted, as long as you went to Sunflower Valley and sniffed one of the sunflowers. Now, the legend actually makes more sense. Because think of it this way. If the legend, especially with how old Uncle Otis is, if it actually went from the reign, the time when King Rocky was around, all the way through to when Uncle Otis, as a gold miner, would have heard of this. And in a way that makes sense, because again, Gold Rush, that time in our history when gold was found up north and people always wanted to travel up north to get the gold and everything, and during that time there definitely would have been myths and legends of different kinds, so that again ties in a little bit with our own history. What if he had heard about the legend at some point during that time? And also what makes this even more interesting is, what if miners like him wanted to try and find King Rocky's gold even in King Rocky's older years? If King Rocky had the option, as well as his friends and anyone who was a pup, could on their own transform into werepuppies, now you have a solution for your gold problem. You have the ability to rule as king, but if you're concerned about people coming and taking the gold, you can transform into a monster, if you will, or a creature of the night, and howl and scare off people, because there's the idea that what's the point of gaining the gold if there's a possibility of getting attacked or, chased after by a werepuppy. Now all of a sudden they're using the legend to their advantage. They're using it as a scare tactic in order to make sure people would not go after the gold. But at the same time, it would kind of backfire on them, because all of a sudden now they're building a bad reputation for themselves with these monsters when they transform. And if King Rocky was found out to be a monster and he did it for the sake of saving his gold, that would be understandable. But the fact that he would scare innocent people, and that especially would affect him terribly. The fact that what if he was taking it too far and was scaring people and causing even more problems, he would have had to stop, but at the same time, his gold would still be in danger. So what if, as a solution, they decided to make it so that way his kingdom could still be in existence? It would still be alive. People could still look at it. But because he wanted to keep it safe, but at the same time not scare people and cause even more mayhem by accident, they hide it underground. Now all of a sudden that also makes sense, because it's under town hall. It's still in a location of authority for the town, but it's underground where it's going to be safe. No one's not going to know anything about it. And even if it was underground, they would have tried their best to make sure no one could get to the gold except for the king himself or any people who served under King Rocky if they ever needed to go back. On top of that, what if a piece of that gold was either left for one of his ancestors to find, or it was discarded during the time in which it was put underground and then was lost forever? That then explains Mary Goodway's grandmother and her pup being able to find that golden bone. But if they can't find the chamber, then there's no way that they would know where it existed, and that's because it was discarded or it was given away or hidden by King Rocky as a souvenir for one of his future generation ancestors. But at the same time, he didn't leave clues because he didn't want his gold being in danger. Again, all of this makes sense. It adds up. So, I mean, if this is all, again, all of this is a theory, but again, if this is all true, what genius writing, genius foreshadowing of all these different events, indirectly telling the story of Paw Patrol members, and then the fans having to connect the dots. I mean, really stop and think about everything I've said from a historical standpoint, even if it's mixed up compared to what actually happened in our own history. I mean, all of this would make perfect sense. It makes perfect sense given the timeline and everything that we've been introduced to. Again, it wouldn't have been that hard to imagine. What if this is a part of some of the Pups' backstories? And on top of that, it might even explain Rocky's fear of water. I mean, if his ancestors used that legend to turn to werepuppies, but then because they ended up scaring other people because they were afraid werepuppies were going to go after them, which eventually would have led to King Rocky having his kingdom buried underground so no one could find it, as well as, you know, the possibility of not only keeping it safe, but doing it for the sake of, you know, listen, we don't want to scare anyone, so here's the deal. We'll hide it underground and we'll make it so no one can find it, and, you know, to stop all this craziness, we'll stop trying to wear puppies, but we'll still keep the treasure safe. I mean, again, that makes perfect sense. And that concept of not wanting to go in water of any kind just because of, when I go into water and the moon comes up and I turn to a werepuppy, I don't want to scare anybody else. And again, you know, if that was the reason, and passed down generation after generation, you know, since King Rocky, if that was the legitimate reason or a legitimate reason for why his kind didn't like water or didn't want to get wet or didn't want to be, you know, near or in water in the first place, it's ingrained in their head. It's the idea that, oh, water is bad because of this legend, because we're afraid that if we go into it at a bad time, when the moon is up, we'll turn into werepuppies. Again, it's a story, but again, look at the format of how Uncle Otis explained how it was, plus our own real life, you know, myths and legends of werewolves. All of a sudden, it makes sense. If they're afraid to go in water because they're afraid to turn into werepuppies by accident, and it got passed on and on, that would explain why Rocky is so afraid of the water. So, even that is a little bit added on to, you know, not just him as a pup and his personality, but even his ancestry. You know, we may have a legitimate reason why he's actually afraid of going into the water, which is really interesting because, I mean, again, it makes sense, but at the same time, you would never think that unless you thought of all these different concepts and theories that I thought of, because, again, it adds on top of each other, and given the timeline that we've been given in the show, all of this now starts to make more and more sense when you think about it. So, yeah, what if Rocky's ancestors were in fact real werepuppies, but then they buried King Rocky's treasure underground, and no one spoke about it, or, you know, a part was discarded, bada bing bada boom. That's how Mayor Goodway's grandmother was able to find that gold bone by accident. Or, you know, King Rocky, you know, throwing it away for the sake of wanting his ancestors to possibly find it, to, you know, let his legacy live on. Either way, it works. It really does. And so, with all of this going on, I mean, again, all of these are, this is probably my biggest theory ever, because it's like a whole bunch of things added on top of each other. But again, if all of this is true, that's brilliant. No one would have ever expected something like that, especially given all the different moments that we've been thrown, you know, in a sense, we've been given the bone of all these different moments from history. You just have to connect the dots, which is in a sense what I've done in this series videos, but again, it's nuts. I mean, when you really stop and think about it, it's not that hard to see this actually happening or even being a part of the PAW Patrol universe's history. But then again, that may change because, keep in mind, I just said Tracker, Sky possibly, Rubble, and Rockies. We don't know anything about Everest, or Marshall, or Chase, or Zuma. All the other pups, though, possibly yes. So, I mean, that's all I got. What do you guys think? I mean, could I actually be pointing out stuff that may actually grow and actually explain some of the backstory of the pups, or at least their ancestry? Or do you think this is just a huge coincidence and I'm just going to do a bunch of dots based on history and other parts of the show, and it would just make for good fan fiction, which, yes, I intend to write. But yeah, just tell me your guys' thoughts, because this is the only thing I can come up with in regards to character backstory. Because again, we only have Tracker and Everest a little bit, plus Rubbles, and then none of the other characters, none of their backstories. So again, it's interesting, but at the same time, you know, what if this was a possibility? Who knows? So, anywho, that's it. What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments. Thank you, and I will see you next time. Bye.